Welcome to the webinar exploring Between Welcome and Exclusion, Australia and the Politics of Asylum during COVID-19, run by Jesuit Refugee Service Australia. My name is Zoe and I'm the community organiser here at JRS. I'd like to start by acknowledging and paying respect to the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we meet on tonight. Today I'm meeting you all from the lands of the Gottardo people of the Eora Nation, and I acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. Sovereignty has never been ceded, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. The theme of Refugee Week 2020 is a year of welcome. A welcoming Australia, however, remains an aspiration. Through the COVID-19 crisis, we have seen the federal government choose to exclude temporary migrants, including people seeking asylum, from its extraordinary JobKeeper and job seeker support packages. This intentional response sits atop decades of punitive policy designed to deter people from seeking asylum on our shores and pushing them to return home if they have already arrived and asked for our protection. In a recent Saturday paper article, Professor Guy Goodwin-Gill of the Caldwell Centre described policies towards those already seeking asylum in Australia as a form of deportation by destitution. Yet many others have done the opposite of how the federal government has responded by embodying the spirit of welcome. State governments have stepped up, as have businesses, charities, and former refugees themselves. There have been so many thousands of Australians who've kept people safe and well during COVID-19. Through this crisis by volunteering, providing food, money for rent and medications, contacting their local MP, and generally just being there for people in need. Many of you who have, and a lot of you probably who have joined us here tonight, just by joining shows your support. Organisations like JRS Australia engage with both sides of the coin. Today we attempt to start unpacking these deep-seated and complex contrasts to look at exclusion and welcome from a number of perspectives. And we have a wonderful, diverse and qualified panel to address these questions. So I'd like to invite all the panelists now to turn their videos on so I can give a quick introduction. Wonderful, thanks for joining us. So today I'll share their bio right before they speak, but we've got Father Peter Smith here, we've got Dr. Eve Lester, Carolina Gottardo, and Idrissa Dumbuya. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight and being able to speak on our panel. I'll be able to introduce you back in a moment. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
So I'd now like to put it to your beautiful people who are attending tonight. I want to ask you, what does welcome mean to you? If you could please write in the chat, and then we can share with each other what welcome means to us as we explore this issue deeper tonight. So what do you think of when you think of welcome? To me, I think of definitely inclusivity, a warm place, a place where everyone feels at home. Got someone saying belonging, hospitality, acceptance, safety, comfort, equal share in society. I love that one. Home, warm acceptance, making me feel equal, protection. These are great. Thanks, everyone. Connection, representation, basic rights, being accepted, inclusion. Amazing. Acceptance. Great. Thank you so much. So I think that really sums up and shows us all that we understand what welcome is, and we can see how important it is for us to be welcomed and to make sure other people feel welcomed as well, as we have so many different words to describe it. So I'd now like to invite Dr. Eve Lester to join me on video. So Dr. Eve is a public and international lawyer with more than 25 years experience working on the rights of the forcibly displaced and human rights more broadly. She worked with or consulted to a range of non-government and intergovernmental organizations, including the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and Amnesty International, and also has consulted with governments. Eve has a PhD in law from the University of Melbourne and researches, writes, teaches, and consults in her field of expertise. Her new book, Making Migration Law, The Foreigner, Sovereignty and the Case of Australia, was published by Cambridge University Press in 2018. Eve is also the founding director of the social enterprise developing technology for monitoring conditions in immigration detention and other closed environments, and has received a Myer Innovation Fellowship 2020 to take this project to the next level. Eve is going to share her reflections on how and why the federal government has excluded people seeking asylum, refugees, and migrants during this time. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Eve.
Thank you, Zoe. I think my microphone is on. So I just 1 moment. Yeah. So thank you very much, Zoe, and thank you to JRS for organising this event and for the invitation to speak. And can I begin by acknowledging the Bunurong people on which I am present, speaking to you this evening. And just to offer a reflection that I think there's an enormous amount that we can learn from the Indigenous tradition of welcome and the Indigenous concept of sovereignty in terms of how we reflect on our reception of refugees and asylum seekers and other migrants in vulnerable situations. Can I also offer my very warm congratulations to JRS and to RACS for their 2020 New South Wales Humanitarian Award, which was announced last week, for their joint project, Finding Safety for Women at Risk. Both are great organisations doing fantastic work with extraordinary women. So tonight I've been asked to reflect on how and why in its COVID-19 response, the federal government has excluded people with temporary migration status, whether they're people seeking asylum, refugees or migrants in vulnerable situations. And I've been asked to talk a bit about where I think this impulse comes from. So I'll approach the question in this order. First, what's happening? Second, how does it happen? Third, why is it happening? And finally, a couple of reflections. So what's happening? Pre-COVID-19, people with temporary migration status of many kinds were often in precarious employment and therefore highly vulnerable. Even if they had work rights, they were relying on things like casual labour market opportunities and the gig economy. Many of this million-strong migrant workforce have been providing the essential services on which we all depend. Caring for our little children, caring for our elderly mums and dads, cleaning and disinfecting our hospitals and our homes, picking our fruit and vegetables, processing our meat, delivering our food. Already vulnerable to labour exploitation and wage theft, and living without a basic safety net, in the context of COVID-19, many have now lost their jobs. But the federal government has refused to step into the breach. No JobKeeper, no job seeker. Instead, migrants on temporary visas have been told they should rely on their savings or superannuation or go home. But few have savings, much less superannuation. Instead, they're living hand to mouth, can't go home, and find themselves dependent on organisations like JRS. So what we have is a situation where people who live in and contribute to our community are being treated as if they do not belong. And this has created a massive humanitarian crisis. In response to this crisis, state governments have made some important symbolic gestures. They've provided funds to support people on temporary visas. In doing so, they've laid bare, but not filled, a serious policy gap that has been created by federal government policy. Policy that has left many people on temporary visas vulnerable to destitution and homelessness. So how does this happen? The Australian Constitution contains no Bill of Rights, but it's worse than that. Our Constitution was framed as a tool of exclusion. The drafters didn't just exclude safeguards, they actively resisted them. The Constitution gave, and continues to give, the government powers to decide how we will treat people that the Constitution describes as aliens. Those powers are effectively absolute or authoritarian in character. One of the effects of this is that any protections that migrants on temporary visas enjoy is entirely policy-based. No laws, no scrutiny, no accountability, no safeguards. In practice, what this means is that while some get work rights, there is no right to have work rights. While some get financial support, there is no right to social security. While some get access to Medicare, there's no right to healthcare. So why is nothing happening even in the face of a public health crisis of dimensions that we have not known in our lifetimes? Although these gaps were visible before, COVID-19 has exposed both the human effects and the short-sightedness of these policies of exclusion in new ways. COVID-19 doesn't infect people on the basis of visa status, but it often finds its way to places where people with temporary or no visa status can also be found. Immigration detention centres, meatworks, aged care facilities, overcrowded housing, to name a few. At every level, it makes absolutely no sense to exclude people living in our community from our response to COVID-19 on the basis of their migration status. They live in our community, they work in our community, they're part of our community. So it's in everyone's interests that everyone is included. In my view, in Australia, exclusion has become a bad habit, a default response that is so deeply ingrained that even in the face of a public health crisis, we cannot shake it. The impulse to exclude is so deeply embedded in the collective Australian psyche that we see exclusion as inevitable. As a nation, we've become blind to the possibility that there may be another way. So to close, in the hope that COVID-19 may open our collective eyes to the possibility of a different future, let me offer two reflections. First, let me quote from a UN policy brief on people on the move that sets out 4 basic tenets to advancing safe and inclusive human mobility during and in the aftermath of COVID-19. 1, exclusion is costly in the long run, whereas inclusion pays off for everyone. 2, the response to COVID-19 and protecting the human rights of people on the move are not mutually exclusive. 3, no one is safe until everyone is safe. And 4, people on the move are part of the solution. My second reflection is this: the power to exclude is also a power to include. This means that we, the state of Australia, already have the power to change. We could certainly do with more safeguards, but in the meantime, we already have the power to respond differently, to be inclusive. This also means that however deeply ingrained our national habit of exclusion, we, the people, have the power to demand inclusion. Thank you all for coming, and back to you, Zoe.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Such a great, strong way to start, really hearing your insights around all this and getting that great foundation of what's happening at a government level. So thank you so much for your time, Eve. I'd now like to invite Father Peter to join me. So Father Peter is a priest of the Archdiocese of Sydney, Australia, and he is the parish priest of the inner city parish of St. Columbus, North Leichhardt. I'm just going to see, Eve, are you able to please turn your video off? Or maybe, is Eve's video off? Maybe Nish, could you please turn Eve's video off? Or maybe something's frozen. Peter is also the promoter of justice and peace for the Archdiocese and teaches in both the medical and physiological and theological facilities of the University of Notre Dame, Sydney. Additionally, he sits on a number of committees, including the Australian Catholic Social Justice Council, the Sydney Archdiocese Anti-Slavery Committee, and the Archdiocesan Properties Committee. Peter is the co-editor-in-chief of Solidarity, the journal of the Catholic Social Thought and Secular Ethics, and a founding member of the Global Catholic Climate Network. Father Peter is going to share with us his reflections on the Catholic tradition of welcoming the stranger and the Church's response during COVID-19. Thank you so much for joining us, Father Peter.
Thank you, Zoe. And Eve, thank you very much for your presentation. I'd like to say thank you to all at JRS for inviting me to speak to you tonight. And it's with gratitude for all the great work that JRS and so many other organisations are doing for our refugees and people who are seeking asylum. So, our Catholic tradition. It seems to me that care for refugees and people seeking asylum, and indeed just the whole notion of welcome, is replete through our Catholic tradition. When I think about the Old Testament and our Judeo-Christian tradition, I'm reminded of Leviticus, which says, "When an alien resides with you in your land, you shall not oppress the alien. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you are aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." In the Old Testament, there's a great tradition of offering hospitality. Clearly, there were people frequently in need of caring for and supporting each other. And so began in our tradition this concern for the neighbour, especially those who were left behind, if you like. When we think of the New Testament, we witness Jesus continually welcoming the people who were left out. We continually see him going out to those on the margins. We continually see him exhorting his disciples, and indeed us, to follow suit. I'm always thinking about Matthew 25, when Jesus said, "As often as you do this to one of the very least of these, my brothers and sisters, then you do it to me." In other words, I think Jesus was challenging us to see his face in all those that we meet. What a different world we would have if I could do that every day and if all of us could. But Jesus himself, of course, was a refugee. His life was threatened at the time of his birth, and his family had to flee to Egypt. Fortunately, they found welcome there. From the time of Jesus, our church has tried in its own way to welcome the stranger. In the early church tradition, it was the widows and orphans who were offered no support by the state at the time. They were not able to inherit, they were not able to own property. And so the early disciples recognised the need for them to care for those people in their midst. That has continued to our own time. It's interesting when I think of our modern church, how when that terrible event at Lampedusa occurred in 2013, Pope Francis, who I think has been an inspiration to all of us, dropped everything, went to Lampedusa. He got his friends to build an altar out of the wreckage of the boat that people had drowned on. He celebrated Mass for those people. And he exhorted the world, that is, you and me, to follow suit, to care for those people who were refugees in our midst, who were those who were most in need of those who were struggling. Pope Francis was, of course, just reflecting our Catholic social teaching tradition. Catholic social teaching informs us that we need to care for the innocent. We need to see each person as valued. We need to see the principle of protecting the innocent, that we need to have solidarity with them. I'd like to just quote to you article number 505 from the Compendium of Social Justice. It says in part, "The principle of humanity inscribed in the conscience of every person and all peoples includes the obligation to protect civil populations from the effects of war. A particular category of war victim is found by refugees, forced by combat to flee the places where they habitually live and to seek refuge in foreign countries. The Church is close to them, not only with her pastoral presence and material support, but also with her commitment to defend human dignity. That's the challenge that we face, to defend that human dignity. In 2015, the Australian bishops released a document on refugees and people seeking asylum. It was entitled, "For Those Who Have Come Across the Seas." That document was a challenge to leaders of the church, to all priests, religious, lay people, and indeed our parliamentarians to respond to the needs of refugees in our society. I'm not sure how well we have responded to that, especially at the government level. As Eve mentioned, we have left so many behind. We have not been a people who have welcomed, in our modern era, refugees and people seeking asylum. We think that there are 70 million displaced people in our world at the moment, 70 million fleeing war and strife. And our country has not responded well to them. We had a great track record for so many years. After the Second World War, migration filled these shores and built a great nation for us. After Vietnam, we opened our borders to refugees and boat people, and they have made a significant contribution as well. But somehow we've backed away from that hospitality. We've backed away from that welcome. We've become a country that has excluded foreigners rather than welcoming and recognising the contribution that they make. That's something that we need to turn around. That's something that the church challenges us to do. That's something that the gospel is challenging us to do. I don't know about you, but so often I think we can feel powerless in the face of government, in the face of big business, in the face of what seems to be an alienation of those people most deserving of our support. So, what can we do? Well, the first thing that occurs to me is that over the last couple of decades, we have demonised refugees and people seeking asylum. We have called them queue jumpers, illegals, all those kind of things. We need to be informed about the real situation. And then I think we need to have the quiet conversations with our friends, with our families, with those workmates, that we can actually influence how other people perceive it. In doing so, we can turn around that conversation. We can stop seeing them as a threat and begin to see the great contribution that refugees and people seeking asylum have already made to this country. Then, maybe then, we will see that the idea of welcoming more is something that we'd all like to do. Secondly, we can support organisations like Jesuit Refugee Services, who are there on the ground helping these people who are in need, with all those practical support things that have been left behind for them that they've been not allowed to receive from the government. And so many not-for-profits have had to pick up the role of what I believe is the responsibility of government. We're very grateful to those organisations, but it shouldn't all fall to them. The other thing that, of course, is important as Christians is that we become advocates for those who are in need. That we speak out, we speak up, we talk to our politicians, we write letters, we sign petitions, we let them know that there is a different and a better way, and that we as Christians don't believe that they are responding to the so-called Christian ethic that they profess as government. And so I think that we need, we need to be constantly haranguing our parliamentarians, our politicians, to get them to change the way that we care for those in need. Their denial of people's rights has been highlighted, as Eve said, through this COVID-19 crisis. Finally, of course, we are people of prayer. We are people who place our trust in the God of love that walks in our midst. We try to see Jesus in those people that we meet. Our church is a church of welcome, hopefully in our local parishes, in our communities, amongst the poor and the marginalised. Some of the poorest and marginalised in our society now are refugees and people seeking asylum. Let's stand up for them.
Thank you so much, Peter. Really appreciate your time and you sharing all that, and absolutely so many great points of calls to action that we can take to make sure that we are part of being a more welcoming society. So thank you for that. I'd now like to invite Carolina to join us. So much, Carolina, for joining. Yeah, what an incredible panel we've already had, and grateful that you're here to finish us up with us. So Carolina is a migrant lawyer and economics who's worked on human rights issues for more than 20 years in different regions. She specializes on migration, asylum, and gender. Carolina is the director of the Jesuit Refugee Service Australia, aiming to accompany, serve, and advocate for the rights of refugees, people seeking asylum, and migrants in vulnerable situations. Previously, Carolina was the CEO of a migrant women's rights organisation in the UK. Carolina's expertise on policy and advocacy, and she is the National Policy and Research Director of the Refugee Council of Australia and was a senior manager, the British Red Cross and British Institute of Human Rights in the UK. Carolina has served on different boards in London, Bangkok, Brussels, Botagoya, and Sydney, and she's currently the chair of Women, Gender and Diversity Group and focal point of the Global Compact for Migration at the Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network. Carolina has ample experience of advocacy with the UN system and is a member of the UN Women's Global Expert Working Group to address the human rights of women in the GCM. She is also a member of the board of the International Detention Coalition and the Global Coalition for Migration. Caroline has seen firsthand so many acts of generosity and empathy during this time. She'll be sharing some of these stories and experiences with us now. Thank you so much for joining us, Carolina.
Thanks, Zoe. And I want to say good evening to everyone. I see so many names of old friends and new friends. So thank you so much for joining our webinar. And I want to start by thanking our previous speakers, Eve, Peter, and Idrissa. And I want to also say that it takes a lot of courage, Idrissa, to speak about issues that affect you in such an open manner. So thanks to you. And to Eve and to Peter for giving us such a good context of the situation. In the previous JRS webinar, I did talk about the grim situation that we're seeing, and I think that that context has been given by our previous speakers in terms of what is happening on the ground and how people seeking asylum and refugees and migrants in vulnerable situations are being affected by COVID. This hasn't changed very much. But today I want to focus on something different. I want actually to focus, we have seen what the policies of the country has been, that they have been of not welcoming, but I want to focus on Australians and on migrants in Australians and refugees in Australians that have been, and the people that have actually been welcoming in Australia. That is such a contrast with the policies of the government. So I want to really talk about the amazing, daily, inspiring things that we see that we witness at JRS, really from a lot of you here today and from people that do feel and do care for people seeking protection in this country. The first thing is I want to remind you a little bit of the statistics so you could get a picture of the whole situation, and then go into some examples and show you some photos as well. I would love to show you some photos. So we have seen and really quite, if talk about a humanitarian crisis, and the situation has been devastating. In terms of JRS, we have seen an increase in demand of 224% for our services. For instance, between Q1 and Q2 of this year, we have seen 61% increase in the disbursements of direct financial relief to the people that we serve, predominantly for issues such as housing, medication, emergency relief, etc. We still can't cover the demand that we have, which is incredible. In terms of our food bank, we are currently in Q1, we were providing around 140 households with some food for 350 people per month. Right now, we're doing 275 households and 750 people on a weekly basis. And that kind of shows you the scale of the crisis. We also have seen since April an average of 40 women seeking asylum and women on temporary visas or experiencing domestic and family violence contacting JRS Women's Space, and this roughly equals 388 calls, many of them being about critical DV incidents. So really quite staggering numbers, but I want to remind us all to remember what Pope Francis says to us in the last World Refugee Day statement, and is that we need to think that behind the numbers there are people, and there are people, amazing people like Idrissa and so many of the leaders that we are serving at JRS. And let me start sharing some pictures so that you could see a little bit what has been going on. So if you see this picture here, this is at the beginning of when we started, and that's why the numbers are lower. But this was the text messages that some of the people we served were sending back to us after we were starting to deliver food, and that was a lovely, lovely message of gratitude. We have had a lot of voicemail calls, voicemail messages that we have some of the people that we serve sending us the recycled bags, sending them back to JRS, and a lot of really touching gratitude from the people that we serve. I want to share a lot of stories of generosity from many people. I'm not going to use private names because there have been so many that I actually want to make justice to everyone, but I want to tell you a few of the stories of what we have seen. So one of the main reasons why we have been able to do what we have done is because of our volunteers. So I want to express the gratitude also to our volunteers, the ones we had before COVID hit, and unfortunately many of them couldn't stay with us. And now we have recruited around 70 new volunteers, and to be honest, we just would have been absolutely impossible to do this without our volunteers. It has been an amazing team effort, and our staff and volunteers have been just there doing amazing things. Here you see the middle picture, that's the way the deliveries look just before they go. And that happens 3 times per week. And as I said, it goes to 750 people. You can see some of the fresh fruit, etc. there in that picture. I also want to mention the amazing role of the parishes. So many parishes, and not only in terms of food collection, but also advocacy efforts. So for instance, we have so many of them being collection points, and you could see one of our leaflets on the collection points and other organizations. This picture on the top right is the day that we received the donation of toilet roll, and we couldn't believe that because that was the time when, at the beginning, when it was so hard to get it. But parishes have done absolutely amazingly. And if you see the picture here on the far right, that was the donation, that was the collection from one parish, and it took 7 of us to try to unload. It was a car, and on the back of that there was that trailer that you can see, and it took us quite a while because that was the volume of the sort of collection that parish had done, and the very amazing, generous people from that parish. So there have been so many stories like that, and to be honest, they have kept us going, and we are extremely grateful for that. Here you can see the schools, because the schools have also played a big role. So again, doing food collections, we have so many teachers actually volunteering at JRS. With the drives and with the packing, etc., and different activities. A school that did the cache, another schools collecting blankets, food drive, and then we have here, guess the number of jelly beans that the children kind of invented, and that was a way of raising funds for JRS. We have another that is a coloring competition, and all these lots of creative and nice ideas from the different schools. We have worked with so many partners, and I also want to acknowledge so many partners that really have been promoting our activities and have been helping us to secure support. And this has been partners, both Catholic and non-Catholic from the sector. So this collaboration has been really kind of impressive. And also other organizations that have been helping us. For instance, this is a picture of Addison Road that has donated some boxes for us. And then there was the Australian Muslims and Islamic Relief that also donated boxes for us. And I think one story that really, really touched us is this story. And this is a Muslim family that decided to donate $7,000. One family donated $7,000 of food. So they bought it, they brought it to Westmeath. And on a weekend, they packed at the same time that they were fasting for Ramadan. And they spent hours doing physical work. And this is the day when that happened. And that was extremely, extremely touching in terms of what happened. Another story I want to share is the calls that I received from female congregation leaders that actually decided that they wanted to donate the pension funds for JRS because they thought that the people that we served needed it the most. And these calls just came, and it was wonderful because the sisters have also been helping us with in so many different ways, like bringing the food, the canteen sugar, salt, and it has been, I mean, we cannot just say enough about what has been happening in terms of the sisters and their support for JRS. I also want to acknowledge the collaboration from people that believe in social and in political change. Because there have been so many people signing the petition, the Catholic petition, and participating on the work we did with the JPO. And there have been so many people that have been writing to their MPs, that have been meeting their MPs, and that have been putting pressure on this issue. And that is what achieves systemic change. And our message has been that people need a safety net regardless of their immigration status. So I just want to finish by saying that things do continue to be challenging. There is going to be very hard for people to recover their jobs, and it's going to take time. It's going to, I mean, we are still continue pushing for that systemic change, but the federal government has not had an open attitude towards it. That doesn't mean we need to give up. We need to continue doing that. But in the meantime, we will have to continue with the enormous food efforts and the emergency relief efforts, and also invest into employment and seeing what happened in the post-COVID era. But what the difference that those of you and that Australians had made in these times, in times that have not been welcoming from the government, just can really not be underestimated. We don't have enough words to thank you, and to also show that that's the other side of the coin. That is the side of the coin that is welcoming, and that is the side of the coin that shows that people need to be treated with that dignity and that respect that they deserve. And this is the sort of real welcome that we want to see in Australia, and that is actually making a difference, and that is avoiding exclusion to be even worse than what it has been at the level of the federal government. So thank you very much to everyone for that, and thank you also for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Carolina. It's really nice to hear, after some really hard-hitting content at the beginning, to hear that there are some beautiful things that our community is doing as well, and the generosity that comes with really tough times as well at times. So I'd now like to invite all the panelists to join me for our Q&A section. Could all come back on video, please. Welcome back. Nice to see you again. So our first question is for Eve. You distinguish between the responses of our federal government and state governments towards temporary migrants. What drives this discrepancy?
That's a great question. I think in terms of, I think the hand of state governments has been forced. Essentially, the support for migrants and refugees and asylum seekers is a responsibility of the federal government. It's a federal matter. So it would normally fall to the federal government to respond. But in the absence of that, the hand of the states has been forced. And as I think I said, it's been symbolic rather than completely filling the gap. But it's a very important message and one that I hope the federal government will heed.
Thanks. Does anyone want to add anything to that? Great. Thanks, Ian. Oh, yeah, go on.
I agree with you. I mean, it's about the symbolism of what the state government has done, and that has had to do a lot with also with the work of so many people on the ground that have shown how the issue is affecting local communities in different parts of the country. So that's also a tribute to those, including people here that have lobbied on this issue to the level of the state government. But like Eve says, this is really not the responsibility, and what needs to happen now is that the state government hopefully will start also putting pressure on the federal government so that they respond the way they should, because ultimately they are the ones that should be doing this.
Thanks. Okay, this is from Ras. How do we discourage asylum seekers from engaging the services of people smugglers, and how can the government provide alternate legal migration pathways from war-torn countries of the world? Would anyone like to answer that?
Yeah, I'd like to say something, Zoe. I think one of the things that we've been working on at the Justice and Peace Office is gathering together people like JRS, but also many of the other groups who are working with refugees and people seeking asylum to try and come up with a regional solution. What that means is not just from Australia's perspective, but we've been engaged with the Bishops' Commissions of both New Zealand and Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. We're trying to look at what is something that we'll do, exactly as the question said, which I think is a great question, as to how we can prevent people boarding leaky boats to come to Australia. Now, one of those pathways may be processing in another country. So, for example, Indonesia or other nations. If the Australian government was doing that, it would be significantly less costly than what we're pouring into the cruel incarceration that people have experienced over the years. It may be a way forward. So what we're trying to do is to get together a solution that encompasses all of the church leaders of Oceania and the wisdom that is built up amongst those who have been working with refugees and people seeking asylum for many years. And hopefully we can get the church to move and to move government on where that solution might be.
Thanks, Peter. So I've got one from Amelia now. When we have a government that even excludes people seeking asylum during a pandemic, what strategies can we use to advocate for their rights?
I can talk about that. Look, the point is what should work and what could work, and the two of them are different, because in reality, when we're thinking about rights, and I think the previous speaker said very, very clearly, in terms of the spirit of welcome and in terms of what should be done, this shouldn't have happened, and it would have been part of the public health response to include absolutely everyone regardless of status, because coronavirus doesn't discriminate on those grounds. But one of the ways that advocacy could work is in terms of the public health response. Because in reality, when you're facing this sort of crisis, if the government should not, if the government is thinking about every Australian, the government should not really allow for a group of people that are completely excluded and that are forced to actually go into overcrowded conditions, etc., which is completely against what the spirit of public health will say. And we have seen examples from other parts of the world in terms of Singapore and what happened there with migrant workers, etc. So that's an argument that should work with a government like the government we have now. But I find it sad because I think that there should be other arguments, and those arguments are based on human rights and basic dignity that really should work without going into further than that. But yeah, the public health argument is a strong one.
Okay, thank you so much for that Q&A. Sorry we can't get to everyone. We have one of our team members, Nish, in the background writing back to a lot of you, so you can probably see a lot of those responses in the Q&A box as well. Thank you so much to all the panelists for your time tonight, for your expertise, for your stories. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you so much for joining us. So I'll see you guys offline soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Bye.
So now,
thank you, everyone.
So huge thanks to all our speakers, and we're now going to share a number of ways that you can get involved in this area, because it's very clear how many passionate people there are with us right now all around Australia in our own living rooms, and we want to make sure that you can still journey on with us after this webinar. To start with, we're going to be organising community conversations in the coming weeks and months, so please email me if you'd like to join these. It will be a group of like-minded people looking at ways that they can take action. We'll be working with others to organise these conversations as well. If you'd like to give practical support during this time, JRS is running food drives and emergency cash appeals that you can donate to. We're currently feeding 750 people a week. The need is huge, so anything and everything is very appreciated. There is also an important Catholic petition calling for no one to be left behind during COVID-19 that we would love you to sign and share, and we'll send this link to you tomorrow. As you can see, people seeking asylum have no safety net during this time, so we are calling on our government for more support. If you're in Sydney, your local diocese is doing a lot to support people seeking asylum. There are wonderful people in all these different areas doing really important work who we really enjoy working with every day. We'll send through more information tomorrow on how you can connect with the Diocese of Parramatta's Social Justice Team, the Justice and Peace Office in Sydney, and the Social Justice Around the Bay group in Broken Bay. We encourage you to sign up to their newsletters and see how you can get involved. As you've heard today, JRS works in a range of areas to support people. Recently, JRS Australia, with the support of RACS, have been awarded the Best Project at the New South Wales Humanitarian Awards 2020 for our joint project supporting women on temporary visas experiencing or at risk of sexual and gender-based violence. This important work ensures that women can access protection. We also support women survivors to empower themselves and develop their leadership potential. Having a safe and welcoming space is a really important part of every aspect of the work that we do. And we are grateful to all those who make this happen daily. We hope that you here will join us in making Australia a welcoming place for all, especially through tough times like the climate we're currently in. Thank you so much for joining tonight. We've really enjoyed having you here, and we'll be sending an email tomorrow with all the links and this web recording as well so that you can share it with your friends and family. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks, everyone.